Hey, what's up everyone? Tedrick85 here, and today I'm going to be talking about Journey to Silius for the NES. For those of you who have watched my Terminator review, know that I mentioned this game at the end of that review, and I did that for a very specific reason. This game was actually supposed to be based on the Terminator movie, but during the game's production, the licensing rights to the movie were lost. Thus, Sunsoft was forced to change the graphics and storyline. Despite making changes to the game, however, there are portions of the game that look very similar to what you would see if you turned the Terminator into a video game, which I will discuss later on in my review. I'm not sure how Sunsoft lost the rights to this movie, but I really wish they would have been able to keep them, because this is a fantastic game. In fact, I think it's better than the Terminator NES game in virtually every way possible. First of all, I'm going to talk about the graphics, which I think look really awesome. I love that even in the game's first level you can definitely tell you're in a post-apocalyptic world. You could even say it looks just like Judgment Day from the Terminator films in it not being too far-fetched. Sunsoft did an excellent job capturing the setting and the mood of the game with these graphics. I have to mention that this game was made in 1990. That is 2 years before the Terminator was made. Seeing how this game looks, let's look back at how the Terminator looks. If you would have told me that Journey to Silius was made 2 years before the Terminator without me actually knowing, I would have thought you were off your rocker. But as you can see, you can tell that Sunsoft actually cared about how their game looks, whereas the Terminator just looked like a complete and utter mess. Even the character you play as in Journey to Silius, Jay McRae, looks a lot better than what Kyle Reese does. Let's not forget to mention that the HUD in this game takes up very little space on the screen, and it looks like it belongs in an NES game made in 1990, as opposed to the HUD on a Terminator that looks like it was made at least a decade before the rest of the game was. The controls are another thing that make Journey to Silius an enjoyable game to play. They are as smooth of controls as you'll find in an NES game back in the day. Right off the bat, I should say that the A and B buttons are how it should be. A is to jump and B is to shoot. Whereas in the Terminator it was in reverse, making for some confusing and awkward gameplay. You can select what kind of weapon you're using by accessing the weapon selection screen by pressing the start button, and the select button pauses the game as well as lets you alternate between weapons. For me, this game reminds me a lot of Blaster Master, which is another Sunsoft game that is considered a classic for the NES. Now I'm going to talk about gameplay, where I feel the game not only really takes flight, but also where the similarities to the Terminator movies begin to surface. You play as Jay McRae, a young man who's charged with stopping a terrorist group responsible for the death of his father, who is a scientist responsible for developing an outer Earth colony in the Silius solar system. I mentioned earlier in my review how the first level looks a lot like what Earth did after Judgment Day in the Terminator films, but I find the second level just as interesting because it reminds me of the first film, where we see the Resistance hiding from enemy attacks and keeping refuge underground. You also begin to notice as you play that the majority of enemies featured in this game are robots, much like how the humans fight against the machines developed by Skynet. For example, the mini-boss in the first level reminds me of the T1 Terminator seen in T3 Rise of the Machines. Even the first level's boss bears a vague resemblance to a hunter-killer from the films. Not only do some of the enemies look like they came from Judgment Day, but even some of the bosses in this game feel like you're taking on Skynet. Perhaps the most striking similarity is the final boss. Doesn't it look an awful lot like a T-800? I think this is really neat, and I am somewhat surprised that they were able to keep the design of this final boss without having to change it. The fight itself definitely feels like a final battle between man and machine, which makes for an intense and exhilarating gaming experience. As you play, you'll get new weapons which can be selected via the selection screen by pressing start besides the default handgun you start out with. Each new weapon you get has a limited amount of ammo, which you can keep in track of by looking at the gun energy gauge, which is represented in blue on the game's HUD. Each level you play in this game is set up in a run-and-gun fashion, but the level design, enemy placement, and other obstacles keep this game from feeling too repetitive. This game consists of 5 levels, which seems short, but the game's difficulty makes up for this. This is one of the more difficult games that I've played, but it's not so hard that I want to pull out my hair, like Battletoads for instance. I find that the difficulty makes this game a bit more enjoyable, despite you doing pretty much the same thing from level to level. Besides the graphics, controls, and gameplay, this game also is leagues apart from the Terminator in the music department. Simply put, This is some of the best music I've heard in an NES game. Here's a sample of the music from the game's first 2 levels. Isn't that awesome? While I was recording footage of this game for my review, I'm not the least bit shy to admit I was bobbing my head and swinging my feet to the powerful beats and rhythm of its music. If they released the soundtrack to this game on a CD or on iTunes, I would definitely buy it. It's that good. Overall, I'm so glad that I got to play and review this game, especially after reviewing the Terminator. It serves as a nice contrast going from playing one of the worst games I've ever played to one of the best. It makes me sad to think what could have been if Sunsoft developed the Terminator game instead of Mindscape. But with what they had to work with, Sunsoft delivered a very satisfying game. If you have a choice of playing this game and playing the Terminator game, I would highly recommend playing this game, because it is a very fun and exciting one. So if you get a chance, please check this game out. You won't regret it. This is Tedric85 speaking. Thanks for watching, and see you next time.